Assalamu
Assalamu
alaikum.
alaikum, Mohammed. Hayyak Allah.
How are you doing? You okay?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing well. Yourself?
When you said Sheikh Mohammed Hijab, I was thinking, who is this individual that you're going to bring on? It's
Yeah,
another guy.
he's
He's
the
got
one
the
that was
same name as
speaking.
me.
Alhamdulillah. Nice.
How's it going? You okay?
I'm very well, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Nice to have you with us. The last time you were in the States or in California in particular,
Yes,
I believe 2018, around April.
that's correct. Yeah.
Yes, alhamdulillah.
I had a debate in Sacramento with
Absolutely. Yes.
Edward Talash. I'm not sure if any of your
Alhamdulillah.
viewers remember that, but
Yeah, so alhamdulillah, you're back with us again, but under different circumstances. This time over the telelink or the virtual platform. So inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to eradicate COVID so that way we could be united once again with our dear beloved brothers, alhamdulillah.
inshallah.
Sheikh, if you don't mind, I know many of the viewers already are very familiar with you, but we'll just go with a quick biography of yourself, inshallah, just to keep everyone informed for the very few who are not so familiar. Mohammed Hijab is a debater, a public speaker who engages in many discussions and polemics on a wide variety of topics, including religion, politics, and society, covering a wide range of different topics. He has numerous ijazas in some Islamic sciences and has studied in multiple Islamic seminaries, including the Shinqiti Islamic Institute, which employs a traditional Mauritanian style of teaching the sacred sciences. He also has his master's, and he's currently pursuing his PhD doctorate degree, alhamdulillah. Sheikh Mohammed, we have a very interesting and important topic that you're going to talk about, discussions on LGBTQ. I want to remind the viewers who are with us, inshallah, that in order to participate in the chat room, you have to utilize the login username. So put in your username, and that could be anything, right? That's just a form of identification. And then hit accept or log in, and you should be able to share any questions that you have. And then right after the talk is concluded, we'll turn it over and see what kind of questions we have, inshallah. The duration of the talk is about an hour, from 3:10 to 4:10. I know it's probably a little bit late for you right now. What time is it?
It's 11:15 p.m.
Okay, so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward you for carving some time out of your busy schedule. Without further ado, Bismillah.
Should I get started?
Yes, Bismillah. Floor is yours, inshallah.
Okay, and we're going to have a question and answer session at the end.
Yeah, so we have a open chat room where the users can log in, and like I mentioned before, it's any username, just something that they can identify themselves with, and
Yes.
they will be sharing those questions. And as the questions come in, inshallah, I will share them with you towards the end of the lecture.
Okay. Inshallah, the way I want to structure this is
Sure.
I want to start off by talking a brief history on feminism and why is this relevant to the LGBTQ discussion, and how the approach that I favor in terms of these discussions is not necessarily a conflict approach. It's more of an accommodationist approach. And I'll tell you what I mean by all of this.
Sure.
In the Muslim world now, or Muslim individuals, leaders, and religious figures in the West, because obviously the West is right now is promulgating like LGBTQ stuff, and so the Muslim minorities in said countries have to come up with solutions as to how to deal with it, because we're stuck in kind of a situation where on the one hand you have the right wing, who I'm sure in America it's a very similar experience, who have for the most part hostile views on issues like immigration, and may have hostile views towards Muslim people in general, not least because a lot of those on the right are evangelical Christians, and data shows us that evangelical Christians are most likely to have bad or hostile opinions on Muslims in a general sense. And interestingly enough, in fact, pastors and religious figures from that community are more likely to have a conflict approach or hostile attitudes towards Muslim people. So, however, the irony is obviously people on the right, people on the political right, are more likely to have views similar to ours in terms of social conservatism, if you want to call it that for the sake of argument, on issues like LGBTQ. But those on the left who are more likely to be kind of practitioners or part of the LGBTQ community, or heavily supporting the LGBTQ community, people on the left, they have those views which are more antithetical to the Muslim paradigm, but are more likely to accommodate us as individuals and people. So Muslims have tried different approaches. In America, for example, Yaqeen Institute, and from what I understand, from what I've gathered, speaking to them and looking at their publications, they're a group of individuals who kind of see that leaning towards the left, having kind of an accommodationist approach with the left, is probably more in the maslahah or in the common interest of the people, whereas other individuals online and elsewhere from the Muslim community in America and also in other parts of the West have a confrontational approach with, for example, members of the LGBTQ community and or the left generally. And so their jargon will be quite similar to the jargon of evangelicals, but ironically, they will not be supported by them. And you see, we're kind of in between two things here. As Muslims, we're in between. On the one hand, the approach A is the approach where we kind of ally ourselves or align ourselves with the left, and I use the term loosely. And the advantage of that is that we will be guaranteed more rights, or that they will put, to use a term, quid pro quo, they're more likely to kind of defend our rights back. But the disadvantages, which we're seeing with the Yaqeen approach, for example, is that young people cannot tell the difference between what is objectionable Islamically from a spiritual perspective and what is not. Whereas on the other hand, there are big problems with the other approach as well. The other approach is confrontational to the very people who are most likely to support Muslim rights. And so we're losing out if we adopt a completely confrontational approach with the LGBTQ community. So I think there are two approaches. Both of them have their advantages and disadvantages. But for me, I think there is a middle ground. And so the approach I'm promulgating, or that I want to push forward today, is the same approach that I speak about in my book, Fifth Wave Feminism. Because what I decided to do is I spent some years obviously doing political philosophy in the undergraduate years, the formative years of my own development, and then after that I did one of my master's degrees, and I spent a lot of time in the gender studies department in SOAS University of London, which is particularly left-leaning. So it's probably the most left-leaning university maybe in the whole of the UK, actually. And so I spent a lot of time with people from the queer community, from the trans community. My professors were transgender. And funnily enough, we did have a good, communication with each other. And I spent a lot more time listening than I did talking, because I wanted to know what are the usul, or what are the principles that we're dealing with here. And at the end of it, I published some things, some essays, maybe 6 in number. I believe it's 6 in number. And I made it into a book called Fifth Wave Feminism, which was actually peer reviewed, if you want to put it that way, by my professors who were queer study specialists. And in that, I was grappling with the idea about approaches, because I had been exposed to the two approaches that kind of exist in the Muslim world as it stands with minorities. And quite frankly, I was not happy with either of those approaches. I always felt like, on the one hand, the Yaqeen approach is more capitulatory and compromising, and it allows a kind of micro-liberalism, micro-feminism to penetrate the cultural atmosphere in the Muslim world, and it blurs the lines. And I thought, on the other hand, this other approach, with some brothers online like Daniel Haqiqachu and others who I think believe at one point lived in California, I thought it was a bit too confrontational. I thought it was not, it's not the approach that's going to put us in the right place. So what is the right approach? I believe that we should be working within the system of their own assault, and making an argument from that. So before I tell you what my approach is, I have to give you a 5-minute maybe preamble to my approach, or to the history of feminism in general. Because if we're talking about left-leaning individuals who identify with or allied with, members of the LGBTQ community, it makes sense to invoke something which is used to legitimize the behavior of, or the existence even, of such communities. So feminism, as many of you would know, has different waves. So you had the first wave feminism, which was mostly cause-orientated. It was cause-orientated in the sense that it was about universal suffrage, which means the ability or lack thereof for women to be able to vote. And this is obviously took place about 100 years ago from now in Britain, and also in Canada and America, where women were slowly but surely given the rights to vote. And so the first wave of feminism, as historians put it, was really this time in the beginning of the 20th century, right? And then you had the second wave feminism, which took place in what you refer to as the civil rights movement, or the time of 1960s. And it was more about equal pay. It was more about, gender equality, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, there were some substantial attacks on the family unit. Almost everybody that identified with that movement had something to say about the institution of marriage and how oppressive it is, or whatever. And then third wave feminism came along, and really, Black women in particular, they came out. Bell Hooks was a very famous woman who came forward in feminist studies and said, well, this has been a white experience. What we're talking about is a white experience. And so we need to put in or factor in the experiences of Black women in order for us to be truly representative. And in the 80s, I think it was 1984, Kimberly Crenshaw, she made a statement, or she published a paper with something which would become very popular in third wave feministic discourses, which is something called intersectionalism. Okay, so intersectional feminism is the idea that not only are you a woman, but you are a Black woman. For example, if you're disabled, you'd be disabled. And there's different identifying kind of labels of identification. And so here, it allowed for more inclusivity. People that were Black, people that were disabled, and no doubt people that were homosexual as well. The LGBTQ community was fully integrated into the third wave approach. And so this is really the kind of abbreviated summary or history of feminism. I've written a book called Fifth Wave Feminism because I make the following argument. And in fact, I make an argument I would want to read out from the book that I've written, because I feel like if I do it that way, it would be more effective. So this is the argument I make. Okay, a complex intersectional approach which has the propensity to renegotiate gender categories to either a logical point of non-importance or primary importance is required. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, if you're saying to someone, a woman or a man or whatever, because feminism shouldn't just deal with women. Now remember, queer studies and third wave feminism, it deals with all kinds of people: men, women, black people, white people, people of ethnic groups, different sexualities, whatever it may be. If we say, and this is the argument I basically make, if we say that people should be able to represent themselves in whatever way they want to represent themselves, and they can hierarchize their own gender kind of labeling. So, for example, if a black person finds that their tribe is the most important thing that identifies them, because obviously tribe is important, especially in the African experience, for instance, right? Then that African man or woman can decide, okay, well, tribe is most important, and then after that is gender, or then after that is disability, or after that it may be religion, whatever it may be. But the argument is, if you allow people to hierarchize their own labels in this process referred to as the intersectional approach, then what could eventually happen is that gender becomes irrelevant to the discussion. Like technically it can become irrelevant. Or the theory of justice, which underpins what are the right transactions, can be chosen to be something other than something which is celebrated in the European experience. In short, if you're truly a feminist and you believe in intersectionalism, you believe in this idea that you're not just a woman, you're a woman, you're a black woman, you're a religious woman or irreligious woman, you are whatever it may be, you are disabled, you have a tribe that you associate with. I've just mentioned 5 levels of identification. If such identification needs to be mentioned, and that someone can use 5 labels for who they are, then it should be conceivable within that framework of intersectional feminism that someone, say, is a Muslim, and that their theory of justice is an Islamic one, not an egalitarian second wave theory of justice. So in other words, they don't believe in an absolute equality. They believe in the rules of Quran and Sunnah. They believe in the madhahib al-arba', whatever it may be, the 4 schools of thought. If someone fits that criteria, then within the intersectional approach, we would say understanding intersectionalism properly would entail that someone who's a woman, for example, a woman who is religious, Muslim, or otherwise, she is as much justified in hierarchizing her own identification labels as anybody else. And thus, if she wants to live a life of Quran and Sunnah, for instance, where in which some of the rights of women are different to those of men in inheritance, in marriage and divorce, and whatever it may be, then she has the right to do that. And not only does she have the right to do that, no one has a right to object to that. Because the moment the white woman, if you use that term proverbially, decides, no, these theories of justice, or the Islamic theories of justice, incapable of providing the kind of equality that is required for a woman to, you see, to function in the way that she should be able to function, in order for her to be liberated in the way that she should be liberated. The Islamic theories of justice don't accommodate that. The moment she starts speaking in that way, she's imposing her theory of justice on another woman, which in fact would be intersectionally, from an intersectional perspective, a futile endeavor. And moreover, it will be a type of colonial feminism, because if the woman says, well, this is how you should be living, now the white woman gets to choose what, say, the black woman or the Arab woman or the Chinese woman or whoever it may be, how she should be governed. And so what's happened, if you want to use second wave terminology, if this takes place, is that instead of the patriarchy being a man, it was just be replaced with a white woman. So instead of it being a white man, now it's a white woman leading the patriarchy. So the voices of those individuals who are otherwise voiceless, like black women in tribal Africa, sub-Saharan, or even Saharan Africa, or the Middle East, or wherever it may be. Those voices are not prioritized when theories of justice are being made. And what we've been able to see is that white women in particular, and moreover, maybe after the 70s and 80s, black women more so as well, but all under the remit of Western women, those individuals have had the privileged position of being the ambassadors of all women in the world. And this white savior mentality, where those women are required in order to tell us what's going on and how we should behave ourselves, but basically how we should behave in the Middle East and Africa, are just imposing their own will. So they fall into the patriarchy, and they become a substitute for that. So that's another point. A third point here, which needs to be made, is that how does the LGBTQ community factor into this whole discussion? Well, on the intersectional approach, they identify maybe more with sexuality than they do with gender, or if not, they at least prioritize sexuality. Now, they would argue that, you know, people are being persecuted in all kinds of countries, and homosexuals are not given the equal opportunity to exist as honest and respectable citizens as the rest of the citizens. Now, the fact of the matter is this: those individuals who are part of the LGBTQ community, they in fact are benefiting from, you see, they are benefiting from existence in the liberal West. However, they are a minority, and Muslims are another minority. What tends to happen is something referred to as homo nationalism, which is also in my book referred to as fifth wave feminism. Homo nationalism is basically where you scapegoat in another community in order to get your own rights. So we need to be aware of what homo nationalism is, because if we don't even know what the term is, so we can't defend ourselves, you see, as a community. We're almost having our arm twisted. We're having our arm twisted into believing that we have to align ourselves with the moralities of the LGBTQ community, where in fact, this is a form of homo nationalism, where the homosexual community can scapegoat the Muslim community and basically throw them under the bus because we don't believe in what they believe, right? And so what we have to say is, well, hold on, your right to practice homosexuality is no more privileged than my right to be a Muslim and to believe that homosexuality is an aberration from morality. And so this is where the approach is. You have to work through the approach in order to secure mainstream acceptability, I believe. Because at the end of the day, if we go with the confrontational approach, you're going to burn bridges with the left wing, and it's not a good idea to do that. It really isn't. To burn bridges with the entire left wing is not a good idea. But at the same time, you don't want to accept their morality, because that's even more dangerous than the confrontational approach. So the middle ground approach on how to deal with LGBTQ communities is to speak in their language. In other words, to show them that through the principles that they govern their lives on, the intersectional approach, the even the liberalism, you know, human rights, and all those kinds of keywords that they're acquainted with, that through that we have as much right, okay, to express that homosexuality as a practice is a moral aberration as they do to practice homosexuality. That is the extent of the argument. That is really the extent of the argument. Therefore, if they say, well, you're burning bridges with us, not really, because we're not trying to burn bridges by saying that. We're just making ourselves clear on our moral stances. And moreover, it's like, for example, a vegetarian. Okay, I might be a vegetarian, which I'm not, by the way, but I might be a vegetarian, you see, and be opposed or morally opposed to people eating meat. But it doesn't mean that I'm trying to burn bridges with them or to try and condemn them or be vegophobic or sorry, metophobic or whatever it may be. That's not what we're trying to do. We're just saying that we have a stance on in this parable, right, on this analogy, the eating of meat. Yeah, and we have as much right to have a stance on the eating of meat as you do to eat meat. As you do to eat meat. So I'm allowed to think that eating meat is immoral, just as you're allowed to eat meat. Okay, that's, for example, through the liberal approach, okay, or the harm principle. So from that angle, we say, look, we are citizens of the country. We respect everybody's decision, and we're not trying to impose a Sharia law on non-Muslim subjects. These are our beliefs, and we should be allowed to believe them. And it's really as simple as that. And there's nothing philosophically or constitutionally or legally that should stop us from being able to make that clear-cut distinction. Whereas on the other hand, this confrontational approach is pathetic, quite frankly. You know, it's pathetic, talking and making jokes and humiliating the homosexual community. It's not the way of Lut, quite frankly. You know, alayhi salam. We don't see people, he's very serious in what he is saying, and he gives them options, you see. He gives homosexuals in the Quran, he gives them options, you see. And so the middle ground approach, just to summarize here, because I think it would be good to get straight into questions to make this as much as we can an interactive session. To summarize, I believe we should be, as a community of Muslims, we should be making the argument. And we should be making the argument using their language, because they don't believe in Quran, they do not believe in Sunnah. So if you mention to them the Quran says this, the Sunnah says that, that's not their language. The language is the language of intersectionality, homo nationalism, liberalism, the constitution, human rights. Bring a cocktail of these terms and know how to basically elaborate or articulate a case for rejecting the practice of homosexuality, and if in fact telling people to stop it. I mean, that's our freedom of expression and speech. That's on the one hand, and burning bridges on the other hand. We're not trying to burn bridges, or even go with the confrontational approach, because quite frankly, it's a barrier to da'wah. It is a barrier to da'wah. If you go with the confrontational approach, people are not going to listen to what you have to say. You are disgusting. It's an abomination. How can you do that? The people that are in the West who engage in LGBTQ activities are just not ready to hear that kind of thing. And if they do, they will just shut off. They will just shut off. And you have not done your job of da'wah, because it's not bil hikmah wal maw'izat al hasana if you go with the confrontation approach, because you know it's going to have a negative effect, you see. So I don't believe in that approach, and I think that approach is a foolish approach. It doesn't get anyone anywhere. You can still be very cordial and diplomatic and speak the truth. Yeah, you know, say in a way which is most خاطب الناس على قدر عقولهم. You know, as I think Ali ibn Talib narrates in Athar, which means speak to the people on their level, basically. Speak to the people on their level. Don't give them something they're not ready to hear. And you guys know, because most of the people probably listen to me have spent at least 5 or 10 years in America. So they know the culture, and especially in California, West Coast. You know, West Coast is a blue state, and it's a state which, is very liberal. And so if you go ultra conservative, man, they're not gonna listen to you. And so this is my my solution. Jazakumullah khairan. Let's bring on the questions. Let's make this interactive, because otherwise it's been, I think, 30 minutes. People will get very bored, especially if there's no interaction. And also, it's quite late out, so if I'm being a bit slow, because in London I'm probably be asleep here right now, so I'm not as fiery or edgy as I usually am. But you know, I hope people are listening to what I'm saying.
Yes, indeed, Sheikh. We do have some questions that came in, and we can pause, inshallah, if you would like, just to get that interaction as well.
Yeah, let's get some questions and answers. I think the whole thing here really is about interactivity. Otherwise, it's just like a YouTube lecture, which we don't want to do.
Absolutely. So let me read off this question here. And once again, for those who are online in the chat box or in the chat room, once again, you do not have to open an account or enroll or log in. You simply just have to type in your username and hit the enter button, and that should take you into the chat room so you can plug away your questions that you have. So, and this one is more about, I guess you would say, advice. So somebody says, Assalamu alaikum. One of my friends is a great software engineer, and as such wants to apply to a big tech company like Facebook, like Google. However, he's very skeptical about working at a place which actively propagates LGBTQ plus. So there's plenty of media, posters, and the likes, and also as part of the culture. I guess a lot of these corporations embrace it, and not only embrace it but propagate it as well. The job would be really good for him in his life, but he's put off from simply applying because of this. What would you
Right.
suggest?
I would suggest that he ask that. There's a fatwa issue. This is a mas'ala kind of which requires fatwa. So I would say that you have some really good people in your masjid who are much more qualified and knowledgeable than me in fiqh, which I would suggest that you ask, because this is a fatwa issue. It's not really an issue of da'wah, if you want to put it that way.
Sure. Like, and we do have another one.
Yeah.
How would you go about navigating these discussions with folks? I mean, there is a lot of sensitivity, I guess you would say, with bringing about one's Muslim beliefs, one's thoughts about our side of things, our interpretation, our understanding. A lot of people are very hesitant because of this culture clash, or because of this, oh, you're that type of Muslim, or you're very extreme, or you don't go with mainstream media in terms of what the beliefs are. How would we navigate those type of discussions, or opening them up with certain demographics?
There's no right answer here. There's not one right answer, because it really does depend on the relationship said person has with the end user. Because at the end of the day, it could be someone that you are your colleague at work, and you might be seeing them every single day, or at school or university, which you guys call college. So you might be seeing that person every single day, and so to ram, religion down their throat, or shove it down their throat, they might not like it. In England, I mean, in Britain, the culture is people don't like forceful kind of in conversations about dawah, about religion, generally speaking. So if it's a colleague of yours, you have to kind of stretch your efforts out throughout. Maybe if you're working with them every single day, stretch your efforts out so it doesn't become too obvious what you're trying to do. But enough that if they're curious to know about your religion or something, give them a chance to come and ask yourself, because you want it to be organic and natural and seamless, and not contrived, as if you have some kind of an agenda or something like that. So that's what I would suggest. But if it's people that you're going to see maybe once in a lifetime or once in a while, then why not just bring up a conversation and have that conversation, and ask them questions about what their beliefs are and so on. What's really interesting about the LGBTQ community is that, when you look at the Quran, when Lut alayhi salam speaks to people, all the other prophets in the Quran, they start off by saying, worship God, worship God. But Lut alayhi salam, if you look at like the 8 or 9 mentions that he has, he doesn't start by, he's the only prophet really that is in the Quran that does not start by saying worship God. If you think about it, right? He starts by saying, أَإِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالِ وَتَقَطَعُونَ السَّبِيلِ وَتَأْتِينَ فِي نَادِيكُمُ الْمُنكَرِ. For example, right? أَإِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ شَهْوَةً مِّن دُونِ النِّسَاءِ. And so on, these ayat that say that you go. So he actually deals with homosexuality first. If it's a homosexual person, and I was thinking, and this is maybe me just having tadabbur out loud, but pondering over the verses out loud. Perhaps the reason why he's an istithna, or an exception, is because homosexuality is such an intrusion to the fitrah, to the disposition, that if someone is practicing or has moralized that action, the receptivity that they will have to dawah and to worshipping one God would be seriously diminished. And so that is the elephant in the room. And quite frankly, we have to be brave enough, if we have friends, colleagues, or family members that are moralizing homosexual behavior, to have conversations with them where we ask them questions, about that, and to put a spanner in the woodworks or throw the cat in with the pigeons. You're going to have to attempt it. And obviously, in terms of the kind of arguments you can make, you can just put my name, Mohammed Hijab, and then you can put like homosexual or something like that. You'll see my conversation with homosexuals and what kind of arguments I like to make. That would be a good. I've had lots of conversations with the homosexuals, and you'll see that they get frustrated. Sometimes they get triggered, but that's what they need to hear. Sometimes you say it in the nicest way possible, in the most respectful way possible, but and other times I've had conversations you'll also find which are very productive. So from my experience, I just feel like it depends on the circumstance, you see, and we have to kind of use hikmah, wisdom, and try and really decipher that situation for ourselves.
No. Yeah. Is there, and I don't know if your book, you said the fifth wave of
Feminism, yeah.
If it covers those practical steps, or if it's just more of the origins and how things alluded to it. But and I think most Muslims are well versed, right, when they're talking to an atheist or when they're talking to a Christian about Tawheed and the belief of one God and one Creator. But I would have to say, when it comes to having those dialogues or discussions with somebody who either is
homosexual, yes,
or finds nothing wrong with it, or it's completely fine and normal, what discussions or practical tips or ways of advice would you give somebody to, okay, step one, kind of approach them this direction, and the step two? I know maybe every case is going to be case by case, but is there any practical advice in terms of convincing arguments or ways of discussion and dialogue?
So for me, I try and find out what is referred to as a marji'iyah. So what do they go back to? What principles do they have? What are they committed to? So if they're homosexual that has moralized the behavior of homosexuality, what is the moral framework within which they operate? So I've kind of alluded to intersectionality and feminism, but what I usually do is work on the harm principle in liberalism, because most of those individuals would say something to the effect of, you are free to do whatever you like to do, so long as you don't harm anyone else, right? So which is the harm principle. And you can even say that's the definition of liberalism in a sense. So if they operate on such a worldview, then ask them questions. So what do you think about incest? And this is probably one of the main questions I ask individuals who are homosexuals. What do you think about incest? Sex between a man and a man, a brother and a brother, or a brother and a father, or a son and a father, or even women, sister and sister, for example, homosexual types of incest, or indeed not heterosexual types of incest, but where contraception is used. Because if you don't say contraception is used, they'll say, well, you got deformed babies that can come out as a result, which is harmful. So they may try and make an argument from that. But if you take that out, and a lot of this is the questions, one of the staple questions I ask people who are homosexuals in videos that have now got hundreds of thousands of views, which if you want to watch how I kind of deal with it, you can put my name, and once again, you put homosexuality. You'll see I've had 2 or 3 encounters with homosexuals, and I ask them that this is one of the main questions. And what they say, they get triggered, quite frankly, but I'm sure that somewhere in their mind, they're thinking about the question I asked them, because if the premise is that you can do whatever you want so long as you don't harm anyone else, then sex between a man and a man, or a brother and a brother, or brother and a son and a father, whatever, all of that stuff becomes quickly legitimized. Now they may, if they say, yes, we believe in incest is allowed or whatever, then the question is, do you oppose the fact that the West, America and the UK and European countries and all these countries have not had, for a long time, incest has been illegal? And when was the last time you talked about incest rights? Ask them those questions, because more often than not, they would not have spoken about incest rights. And so if when you start, the first step one is to know what their marja'iyya is, or what their source of reference is when it comes to moral philosophy. So if they mention intersectionality, then we can work on the what I've just said throughout the talk. If they say liberalism, or if they mean it, then we can ask them those kinds of questions and interrogations. But the main thing is for them to have some kind of source or some kind of reference point which you can refer to.
No. So mashallah, we've been getting a few more questions. Maybe we can go through that next one here.
Yes.
Somebody says, do you have any examples of how, let me see here. Oh, it just went again. Do you have any example of how you approach someone who is LGBTQ and giving them da'wah and maybe they accepted Islam?
No, to be honest. The only homosexuals that, you know, I have examples of speaking to homosexuals who were Muslim and that they wanted to get away from it. But I was actually just making this point. They're the least likely demographic,
right,
to convert to religion, not just Islam, to any religion. They are the least likely of all demographics, and there are a few demographics which are very unlikely to embrace Islam, and like for example, the Jewish community is, for some reason, it's very unlikely. If you talk about Christian communities, they are likely, depending on what country. So, for instance, in Egypt, where I'm originally from, the Coptic Christians are much less likely to convert to Islam, although they are the majority, and Egypt is one of the most populous Muslim countries. Coptic Christians are least likely to become Muslim. Maybe even Igbo and Yoruba Nigerians, because even though there's a huge number of Nigerian Muslims from the Hausa tribe, but for tribal reasons and for cultural and social reasons, they don't. So there are demographics of people who are unlikely to convert to Islam, and I would probably put on the top of the list, if you wanted to call them that, the homosexual community. They're very difficult to convert because we're talking about strong shahwat. We're talking about these people who have very powerful impulses, a lot of them, to the same sex, and they know they don't want to feel the guilt of being Muslim. And
I think that even goes back since from the time of Lut alayhi salam, the struggle and issues or difficulties that he dealt with his community as well. I think Sister Sarah shared a question. It was 3 different statements, but maybe if you could group it into one. I wasn't too clear on the questions. Here's another one. What are your thoughts on the reason for the rapid growth of the LGBTQ community in the recent years? And it just seems like, I don't know if it's the help of social media, but it seems like everywhere you look and turn, there's more and more of it, or more propaganda being spread about it.
One of the main reasons, although it's kind of easy to gauge, is because populations have soared. I mean, I don't know if there's any studies to say that as a percentage or ratio of the population that it has increased. It may be the case. I just don't know, because now it's just more socially acceptable for someone to come out and publicly declare it. So these kinds of things are difficult to gauge. Now that we have over 7 billion people on the face of the earth, and the white races, if you want to call them that, or Europe and its extensions, which the America is part of, extensions of Europe, are a huge part of the population, and the social liberalism has made it morally acceptable for homosexuality to be there. And social liberalism has replaced, for all intents and purposes, to a large extent, Christianity as the dominant ethic in the West. And that, with the passing of new legislative legislations in America and in the UK, has allowed the homosexual community to come out in numbers that they would not otherwise come out in. And So it's all of the aforementioned variables, and the switching over to a liberal ethic from a Christian ethic, which happened quite strongly after World War II, actually.
Maybe you could touch on this question here. When it comes to being attracted to the same sex, it's not just mental, as this person has questioned, but it also feels biological, as our bodies physically react to being aroused. What do we do when we are trying to be our best Muslim, but our bodies don't respond to what Allah has made halal or lawful for us? Is it more of a biological or physical attraction, as they're getting at, where, hey, it's not me, this is just how I naturally feel?
This is the problem. A lot of before, when the DSM, the psychological manual that kind of categorizes what are psychological ailments and problems and so on, it didn't put homosexuality, I think, at one point was actually part of that. And so psychiatrists and psychologists, people that are associated heavily with the field, especially psychoanalysis, they could offer solutions to these kinds of things, like what's referred to as free association, hypnosis. I don't know to what extent people all these things are effective, but I know that there are many cases that have spoken to me that people have tried hypnosis and it has worked for them. The problem is, of course, if you're in a state that no one's going to have the same ethics as you, they're not going to try free association hypnosis or cognitive behavioral therapy, whatever it may be, therapeutic, to try and kind of eradicate the problem and make it better. But really and truly, in a nutshell, if we believe that this is a physiological aberration and something which is problematic, then it would require psychological intervention. And what one has to try and do is find an individual who's trained, not necessarily as a psychiatrist, because psychiatrists in the UK, at least, they just deal mostly with prescriptions. Mostly, I mean, you go into their office, they'll give you prescriptions and they tell you to get out. So some kind of a counselor, some kind of individual to really, because sexuality is deep in the unconscious mind. If we take Freudian psychology seriously, the psychosexual stages of development, the early child, these stay with the human being for a long time, and you'll find that so much is there in the unconscious mind which makes someone physiologically attracted or repelled by certain things and external stimuli. And there are lots of studies that have actually been done to show that a lot of homosexuals feel they have a sexual tendency or inclination towards the same gender because they've been abused as a child or molested or something like that. There's great data for that. I mean, it's so easy to prove. And these traumas need to be identified by trained professionals, and especially because we're talking about the unconscious mind, that stuff needs to resurface into the conscious mind, and then you can try and disentangle it, and that may fix the issue. But in general, I mean, I'm not working in the field of psychology, so once again, this is kind of outside of my pay grade, or even out of my field of interest or study. But from what I've had, my just like cordial and normal conversations I've had with people who are homosexuals, I tell them things which seem maybe counterintuitive or very obvious. So this was an effective exchange I had with someone. They were saying the same thing. They said that they're not basically sexually attracted to the opposite gender. I said to them, yeah, sorry, let me just add to it. So I said to him, look, I said to him, how comes? How comes? He said, well, because that's just the way it is, blah, blah, blah. I said, no problem. I said, but, and this is going to get explicit. Can I get explicit here, or are the children watching or something?
There might be some families, so maybe we could...
Should we just, okay,
yeah.
No problem. But basically, I won't go into the explicit detail, but I'll just say one thing. I gave him the analogy of coffee. I said, "Do you
Yes.
drink? I said, "Do you drink coffee?" Person said, "Yeah, I drink coffee." I said, "Did you always like coffee?" You know, he said, "No, I hate it." I'm sure. Would you drink coffee? By the way, you,
I do.
yeah. But when
Yeah.
you first had it, how old were you when you first had that coffee?
I know the first time I tried it, I did not like it at all.
It's bitter, isn't it?
It
So
was.
it's really an acquired taste.
Yeah.
So what I said to him is, you have to build up your tolerance for women. Basically, all it is. It's not an acquired taste, but if bit by bit, it will become more manageable for you. And I think it did help that individual, because the truth of the matter is, there's a huge intersection between the anatomy of a man and the anatomy of a woman. So if you're attracted to men, the woman has a lot of things that the man has, in terms of anatomy. So it's you can manipulate your own behavior, really. I think from a psychological perspective, and that is, I think, the starting point. The starting point is for you to know that you can actually change your sexual behavior. You can change your sexual behavior. You can condition yourself. Many people have changed their sexual behavior. Some people realize, they come out of the closet, or whatever the term they use. You can change your sexual behavior based on conditioning. And so when you know that that's possible, and you seek the right kind of guidance, then things start to fall into place.
Absolutely. We have about 5 minutes, and we still have about a few questions, actually 6, 7, 8 questions. But just out of what, in terms of what we got here, let me see if I could. And you might have already touched on this. What is your advice for us in our behavior at a workplace, or your advice to the young adults who are not seeing this issue as a sin in Islam?
Well, these people, for all intents and purposes, have left the fold of Islam, unless they're completely ignorant. They need to be called to Islam from the very beginning, because if someone doesn't realize that the Quran is completely condemning this act, I don't see how they can maintain that and their Islamic faith at the same time. So they need to be called to Islam from the very beginning. If they've rejected the fact that Islam does not allow sexual behavior between man and man, and that one needs to be done to them as if they are disbelievers.
No. Taib. We kind of talked about this already. How does one guide a family member or a loved one back to the path of Allah when they have become part of the community? Let me just read through these questions, and then we can see how can we explain to our youth the Muslim stance on LGBTQ. Here's another one. My children are 11 and 9. My oldest asked me, what is LGBTQ? What's the best way to tell them, and what should I tell them? Nowadays, even if you're careful, it's all in the shows and advertisements. Any thoughts? I know these are just a few questions. Anything that sticks out as probably a hot topic that should be addressed?
It's important that you own the conversation, and you tell them what needs to be said in the most subtle way possible. But be careful, because I mean, in the UK we have social services. I don't know what you have in the US, but if the kid goes to school and says, the gays are going to hell or something like that, then maybe they'll be taken away. So you got to be careful as to what you say to your children, because of law enforcement in that state or country, wherever you guys in California. So make sure you don't say something which will end up being used against you in a court of law.
Sure.
Yeah.
Perfect. Here's maybe you know what? Let's do one quick last one. Hopefully, we have less than a minute. How do we deal with Muslim peers who support the LGBTQ movement and think Islam is all about loving and accepting everyone?
Well, this is the thing. We have to correct that. To be honest, there's no better way to put it. You have to correct that, because it's not the behavior of Lut alayhi salam.
No.
The Quran.
طيب Sheikh, Jazakumullah khair, barakallah fikum. Just as a quick reminder, Mohammed Hijab, you're not going anywhere, at least not yet. So you're going to be with us in room 2. And
Yes.
it's the title of your topic is Being Us in the US. Being Us in the US. And that is actually starting at 4:10 Pacific Standard Time, which is right now. So Mohammed Hijab will be joining us on room 2. And we appreciate your time. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you, your family, and all of the great work that you are doing. In room 1, inshallah, we will have Sheikh Walid Basyouni,